In 2103, fantastic news began to spread across what remained of the eastern end of the former United States. Appalachia, a land thought lost to inhuman monsters, was becoming safe for habitation again. People looking for a better life in the relative ecological utopia flocked to the region. I'm the Irresolute Cartographer, and this is the story of some of the best organized of those newcomers. This is part 1 of the story of the Settlers of Foundation. To quickly clarify, the name of this organization is simply the Settlers. I have attached "of Foundation" to their name to specify which settlers we're talking about. Having said that, let's get into their story. Though the ranks of the Settlers of Foundation would swell over the 26 years between the Great War and their eventual arrival in Appalachia, we can trace the origins of the original members of the organization to the time before the Great War. In those days, these people worked in the construction trades, and their leader Page was the head of the Washington, D.C. Construction Workers Union. When the war with the People's Republic of China turned nuclear on October 23, 2077, Page organized his fellows and their families and guided them out of the city. Together they left DC on the last train out of Union Station, watching the sky turn green with toxic dust as they fled. The party made their way to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where they settled for a time. Likely drawn to the Steel City by Union ties, they stayed put for the next quarter century. Over those years, Pittsburgh was transformed by toxic waste, nuclear fallout, and a growing raider threat into the Pit, a hellhole in which no survivor of the war should willingly live. Luckily for Page's settlers, though living in the Pit was becoming unsustainable, a new land was opening for settlement to their south, Appalachia. From the late 2080s to the middle of the 2090s, there was worrying news coming out of the mountains of old West Virginia. Refugees fleeing the region told stories of giant bats and terrifying mutants that served them. Some spoke of how Harper's Ferry, a town that had been rebuilt through 7 years of hard labor, had been wiped out by these monstrosities in no more than an hour. Others carried rumors that a paramilitary group, clad in power armor and carrying advanced weaponry, had been wiped out fighting these monsters. Then in late 2096 to early 2097, the refugees stopped coming altogether. The region had become a graveyard stalked by abominations. For the next 5 years, the region seemed lost to human civilization, a status that would only start to reverse in late October 2102. On October 23, 2102, a date that would become known as Reclamation Day in Appalachia, the dwellers of Vault 76 burst forth from their subterranean home. Selected by Vault-Tec from among the best and the brightest that pre-war America had to offer, for 25 years these Vault dwellers had been preparing to return to the surface and rebuild their country. When they finally did emerge into the wasteland, they found not the society in ruins as they expected, but a dead society. In sifting through the ruins of the world, they discovered that the giant bats were known to the now dead Appalachian society as Scorched Beasts, that these Scorched Beasts had created mutants that served them, known as the Scorched, with a disease they spread known as the Scorched Plague. The former dwellers of Vault 76 found that one of the factions of the dead society, known as the Responders, had been working on an inoculation to the Scorched Plague when they had been wiped out. The Vault dwellers managed to complete this inoculation and went on to defeat the Queen of the Scorched Beasts, making Appalachia far safer for human habitation. By 2103, news of their success was spreading to nearby regions, drawing interested parties of all stripes. This news also included rumors of a hoard of treasure hidden in a vault in the mountains. Fertile land and hidden treasure were incentives that were hard to pass up. Hearing of this freshly prepared land, Page's people abandoned the sinking ship that was the Pit and headed for the greener pastures of Appalachia. When Page and his settlers arrived in Appalachia, they were thrilled by the fact that they were surrounded by foliage for the first time in decades. The settlers ascended the tallest mountain in the region, Spruce Knob. The old peak had once been a tourist destination within the Monongahela National Forest that hosted an observation tower and a station for the new monorail system installed between Bromwell and Watoga. Just before the bombs, the site had hosted a wargaming scenario that pitted an Army Ranger unit known as Taggarty's Thunder against a party of Marines encamped around the observation tower. In the aftermath of the bombs, while the Marines appeared to have been killed or to have fled their assignment, the Thunder remained camped in their nearby cave, waiting for orders from command. When no orders came, and with nuclear winter closing in, the Rangers decamped the mountains during a storm and made their way to a survivalist training camp in the valley to the east. The Thunder, later reorganized into the Appalachian branch of the Brotherhood of Steel, eventually returned to the peak and turned it into an observation post. The Brotherhood eventually had to abandon the peak as their war against the Scorched Beasts demanded that they consolidate their forces to turn the monsters back. Since that time, the peak had sat mostly idle, aside from the occasional attempt by the dwellers of Vault 76 to gather resources from the site. When Page's settlers arrived atop Spruce Knob, they founded a new settlement, naming the site Foundation, marking it not just as a fresh start for themselves, but for an entire new society they planned to create. The settlers worked to rehab the existing structures, converting the old monorail station and the train within into housing. In investigating the base of the observation tower, they discovered something incredible. Beneath the seafoam green tower, there was a grotto with office space, pumping equipment in a pond, and grow lamps and trees. Though the exact nature of this area wasn't clear, nor if the Brotherhood had known it was there, the settlers had found something great. They named this area Founders Hall, and it became the home of many of the offices and residences of the highest-ranking settlers. On the surface, they began a major construction campaign, building a sawmill, log cabins, and a market, all enclosed within steel-reinforced log walls. For materials, the settlers set to work deforesting much of the southern slope of Spruce Knob, using heavy equipment and carts to haul the logs to the summit. To protect the main advance up the highway, the settlers built a moat of reinforced concrete. Rather than dig into the ground, they built their new moat above the surface, and they raised the approaching road, crossing their new moat with a narrow bridge that would force any attackers to funnel themselves within range of the settler marksmen. The old support loops of the monorail line were turned into pylons for wind generators, and a new mine was dug into the southern slope of the peak. The settlers protected this mine with a palisade wall and a guard tower, and prepared a cableway to carry materials to the summit. They set about these tasks with an until now unseen vigor born of finally having a home worth sacrificing for. This was a place to start families, a place to begin anew. With their new home taking shape, newcomers began to join the settlers at Foundation. One of these outsiders was Ward, a former raider. When he arrived at Foundation, he initially tried to hide his past, as he was not only ashamed of it, but he feared how the settlers would treat him if they knew. This ended when he found an old self-help book that encouraged him to be a better person, starting with an admission of past faults. When he confessed his wrongdoings to the people of Foundation, expecting imprisonment or exile, he was shocked to find forgiveness. Over the coming months, he became a respected member of the community, and when Page wanted to focus on heading Foundation's construction efforts, Ward found himself as the leader of the settlement's day-to-day operations. As the work on the summit neared its completion, the settlers began to look for nearby sites to start settling. In this effort, a party set off to the south-southwest with a plan of setting up an observation camp. Unfortunately, the settlers' so far peaceful existence in Appalachia was to be an anomaly. The first sign that the easy living wouldn't last came from a former dweller from Vault 76 who walked into Foundation one day with an urgent message. When they asked who was in charge of the settlement, the guard sent them to meet with Ward. Though Page had been the group's informal leader since their flight from Washington, D.C. 26 years prior, he had recently begun to delegate some of his duties to other settlers. As the overseer of day-to-day operations, Ward was less likely than Page to be too busy to meet with this unknown outsider. When Ward proved to be too focused on other tasks to meet with the Vault Dweller, they moved on to speak directly with Page. Page had settled into one of the old rooms in Founders Hall, and thus the Vault Dweller descended the elevator under the observation tower and tracked him down. Upon their meeting, Page recognized that the Vault Dweller was a Vault Dweller, and remarked that if they'd come to evict the settlers, too bad, they were there to stay. When informed of the need to be inoculated against the Scorched Plague, Page was noticeably worried. The settlers had seen the Scorched and their petrified corpses on their way to Spruce Knob, but they had not known precisely what had created the mutants. He balanced this concern with a healthy dose of skepticism, as he figured that if the Vault Dweller didn't want the settlers around, the conception of such an illness would be a great scare tactic to get them to leave. Page wasn't an expert on medical issues, but he had a friend who was, Dr. Aubrey. Page explained to the Vault Dweller that if Dr. Aubrey agreed with her dire assessment of the Scorched Plague, that he would consider discussing inoculation. Unfortunately, the doctor wasn't currently at Foundation. Just days before the arrival of the Vault Dweller, Page had dispatched the Pennsylvanian doctor as part of an expedition to establish an observation camp to the south-southwest. The Vault Dweller left at once and made their way to the proposed campsite, knowing just how much danger the settlers were in. The preceding months had been a revelation for the Vault Dweller. In their time scrabbling over the ruins of the old world, they had learned enough to know that the settlers weren't the first group to underestimate the Scorched Plague. The responders had believed that the threat of the Scorched Beasts and their plague was nowhere near as dire as those across the mountains had claimed. When Harper's Ferry fell to a terrible onslaught of the monsters in June 2086, and the Free States members had fled back to their bunkers, the responders couldn't believe what they heard. Rather than confront the terrible truth, they fell back on pre-war prejudice against the survivalists, accusing them of being selfish when others needed their help. When the power armor-clad Brotherhood of Steel later claimed to be in a life-and-death struggle with the giant bats, the responders put this off as a ploy to bilk them of their valuable supplies. Their ignorance of the threat had finally been wiped away in August 2095, when the Brotherhood announced their imminent destruction over the radio and fell silent. In the 11 months after that time, there had been a frenzy of activity in Morgantown, as the responders tried to play catch-up in a fight they had left on the back burner. At the eastern end of the airport, the responders had organized a quarantine zone. It was in this dismal place that Dr. Claire Hudson had been working on an inoculation against the mutagenic Scorched Plague. By July 2096, though she had learned a lot about the pathogen, it was clear to Dr. Hudson that the equipment at the airport wasn't advanced enough for her needs. Thus, she departed alone for the abandoned ruins of AVR Medical in Charleston. Over the next 5 months, she lived alone in the ruined hospital, fighting technical issues, waiting out supply shortages, and hiding from violent mutants when they invaded her unguarded lab. The struggle ended on November 7th, 2096, when Dr. Hudson sat down at her desk one last time. She knew that she had failed in her efforts, and that within days, those of her friends that yet lived would be dead. In the end, she had been stymied by the complete and total collapse of the responders' supply chain under the strain of the constant attacks. Now, the victims of the Scorched Plague besieged the responders' HQ in Morgantown. Knowing that her end was imminent, but holding out hope that some future generation might make use of her work, she set up a program that would simplify the completion of the inoculation for any who might come after her. Knowing that her friends were fighting a last stand in Morgantown, she departed the old hospital and headed north to join them. Just under 6 years later, the dwellers of Vault 76 emerged into the wasteland. In Morgantown, the Vault dwellers discovered Dr. Hudson's notes and followed her path to the lab in Charleston. In following her instructions, they completed her work and inoculated themselves against the Scorched Plague. It wasn't long after that the former Vault dwellers discovered the shocking origin of the Scorched Plague. It wasn't some horrible mutation created by the radiation of the Great War. It was its own man-made catastrophe. In the decades leading up to the war, the government of the United States hadn't been a body of, by, and for the people as envisioned by its founders. It was just one of the corruption-riddled outposts of the fascistic secret society known as the Enclave. This insidious organization used its union of state and corporate power to enrich themselves by funneling taxpayer money into defense contractors they controlled. As the world approached nuclear Armageddon, the Enclave created bases for themselves to ride out the end of the world, including a massive bunker under the White Spring Resort. In the aftermath of the bombs, control of this bunker passed to Enclave member and former Secretary of Agriculture Thomas Eckhart. Eckhart was a big believer in biowarfare and spent the years running up to the bombs building a state-of-the-art bioweapons lab at the White Spring. On his orders, those experiments spread to clandestine satellite outposts in Appalachia. Sometime in the first few years after the war, an Enclave science team had been performing experiments in an old mine. Accidental contamination in one of these experiments converted one of the bats in the mine into a monster that contaminated the environment around it with a strange illness, an illness that would one day be known as the Scorched Plague. When informed of the beast's existence and the science team's plan to euthanize it, Eckhart instead ordered them to make more of the monsters. In late spring 2086, Eckhart ordered the mass release of the beasts. In the decade after that disastrous event, those plague bats had yielded the ultimate destruction of the surviving population of Appalachia, and the world into which the dwellers of Vault 76 had emerged. The overseer of Vault 76 had recognized the danger the newly arrived wastelanders were in, and thus she had dispatched the messenger who had recently arrived at Foundation, only to chase after the settlers attempting to set up a new outpost. When the Vault dweller arrived at the observation camp, they realized that their warning had already come too late. The camp was overrun by the Scorched, and there were dead settlers strewn about the place. After eliminating the Scorched stragglers, the Vault dweller investigated the site and found evidence of a survivor having fled the encampment. Following the tracks of this survivor as they traveled northeast, the Vault dweller found a secluded cave, and luckily the survivor just so happened to be the doctor, Aubrey. Shaken by the events of the Scorched attack, Aubrey was initially frightened of the Vault dweller. The news that the Scorched carried the highly contagious Scorched Plague that had created them shook him further. The Vault dweller offered to perform a cursory medical exam to ensure that he hadn't been infected, but Aubrey assured them that he hadn't sustained any abrasions in the fight and that he had thoroughly sanitized himself in the aftermath. As he wasn't showing any signs of infection, the Vault dweller cleared Aubrey to return to Foundation. They then departed for Foundation immediately to confer with Paige, leaving Aubrey to gather his things and collect himself. When informed of the fate of his expedition, Page was understandably upset. Though he planned to get the full details of the Scorched attack from Aubrey when he returned, he pushed the Vault Dweller to get his people the inoculation as quickly as possible. With Page's cooperation assured, the Vault Dweller departed Foundation and returned to the Vault 76 Overseer's headquarters in Sutton. She had been working on an inoculation distribution plan for the newcomers since the Vault Dweller had departed for Foundation. While the 76ers had obtained their inoculation in Dr. Hudson's lab and AVR Medical, the site wasn't ideal for inoculating the masses, as it was in a semi-ruined structure filled with mutants in a city overrun with mutants and feral ghouls. She had considered this and had an alternative plan. They were going to mass-produce the inoculation at the Kanawha Nuka-Cola bottling plant. While this might seem like a crazy place to produce a medication, the bottling plant in question wasn't just a mixing, bottling, and distribution site. It was also the local Nuka-Cola headquarters, complete with laboratory. This laboratory was integrated with the bottling equipment to allow any formula produced to be packaged for distribution. While before the war this had been used to experiment with new flavors and chemical additives, the 76ers would use it to bottle a cure. Well, a preventative, but bottle a cure sounds better. The Overseer and the Vault Dweller traveled to the plant and found it overrun with feral ghouls. After clearing the laboratory of those unfortunate souls, they arrived at the beverage formulation system. Using synthetic antibodies produced from the inoculated blood of the Vault Dweller and the proprietary equipment of the laboratory, they formulated a new variety of Nuka-Cola that included those antibodies in a consumable form. The Overseer gave the honor of naming this beverage to the Vault Dweller, and within minutes, fresh bottles of the newest formulation of America's favorite soda were rolling down the line. Nuka-Cola, my blood's in it. With the inoculant Nuka-Cola in hand, the Vault Dweller traveled to Foundation and met with Page in Founders Hall. Though Page was initially skeptical of the soda, he agreed to distribute the inoculation to his people, and with that, Appalachia was far safer for the settlers, along with other wastelanders that also took part in the inoculation program. A second scorching was forestalled, at least for the time being, and the settlers were able to battle the Scorched and the Scorched beasts without fear of falling to the Scorched Plague. With that, the Vault Dweller once again departed Foundation, heading for their Overseer's headquarters. But it wouldn't be long before they returned, and when they did, they would bring the first concrete information on the hidden treasure of Appalachia. Not only was the treasure real, but it was also beyond any reasonable conception. When the Vault Dweller arrived at the Overseer's house, they discussed the treasure rumors that had drawn many of the newcomers to Appalachia. Before they'd been called to action by their Overseer, the Vault Dweller had already had a series of run-ins with treasure hunters. North of Flatwoods, the Wayward Bar had recently opened and become a target for these fortune seekers. The bar was operated by Duchess, a former crime boss from Welch, who had recently moved back to Appalachia after years wandering the wasteland. Working for Duchess, the Vault Dweller hadn't learned much about what the treasure was, but they had at least managed to stop the treasure hunters from harassing the Wayward. That said, the Vault Dweller had a promising idea where the treasure was: Vault 79. In early 2103, before the Wastelanders came into the area, the Vault Dweller had investigated a strange series of events that occurred across Appalachia. Thanks to an error made when setting a timer in the Clarksburg post office, a series of packages had been dispatched across the region by postal bots over 25 years after the bombs. The order for these deliveries had been placed by Flavia Stabo, the owner-operator of the Grafton Pawn Shop. Addressed to community leaders, journalists, and politicians across Appalachia, each of these packages contained a letter of introduction and a piece of evidence related to a conspiracy to cover up a large-scale clandestine operation north of Berkeley Springs. These pieces of evidence ranged from the mundanities of inexplicably heavy shipments traveling to the area, to several suspicious deaths in the area, and even all the way up to the supposed Chinese spy, Shanghai Sally, who fled Berkeley Springs and led the authorities on a multi-thousand-mile chase across the country. After piecing all this information together, the Vault Dweller was led to the hidden entrance of Vault 79 and the likely grave of Flavia Stabo. Like most vaults in the region, the door remained sealed, and there was nothing concrete about the details of its contents. Though the Vault Dweller had exhausted their own leads on the vault just in tracking it down, the Overseer had an idea how to discover its contents. When she had been a student at Vault-Tec University, there had been rumors of a secret restricted wing within the bowels of the university. It was said that this was not just some teacher's lounge or school archive. This was a place where the executives of Vault-Tec would meet with government officials and military officers. If such a place existed, there was a chance that it might have information about the contents of Vault 79. The Overseer and the Vault Dweller departed separately for VTU in Morgantown to begin the search for the secret restricted wing. When they arrived, the Vault Dweller found the Overseer in the administration section of the university, conversing with the last member of the faculty who was still on the job. Professor Bott. Professor Bott wasn't willing to discuss the rumored restricted wing, at least not with non-credentialed individuals. He laid out one condition for any assistance he might provide: the completion of an overseer candidate final exam. His programming dictated that he continue to process graduates for the university, and he wasn't going to deviate from it. As the overseer had already passed this exam, she wasn't eligible, but the Vault Dweller was free to try. The Vault Dweller agreed to his demand and proceeded to the test vault, where they would have to mediate a dispute between members of the Mr. Handy janitorial staff who were acting out a factional dispute within. The Vault Dweller had been in the test vault before, just in the process of exploring the old university. It was on that previous trip that they had learned the terrible story of the last experiment run in the vault. Beginning on October 16, 2077, the student overseer, Drew Collingsworth, was attempting to evaluate a food replacement he had developed. Rather than the typical vault fare, he had produced a nutritious paste that could be flavored by preference, and his goal was to determine if people could stomach eating food with the same texture day in and out. If they could, this paste would have effectively increased the food storage capacity of the vaults, as it took up less space for the same nutritional content. Unfortunately, he wasn't the only one running an experiment. Dean Harland Elliott was running his own test. In this test, Drew's paste was contaminated with an artery clogging agent that killed a man within days of the vault experiment starting. When Drew Collingsworth discovered that his food was killing people, he attempted to have the experiment called off, but received no response from outside. It turned out to be the case that the world had ended 1 week into the experiment, but no one had bothered to let the students out of the vault. With no chance of rescue from the outside, they faced death by starvation or from rapid onset cardiovascular disease. Professor Bott's experiment was far less horrifying. Upon entering the test vault and stepping over the skeletons from the last experiment, the Vault Dweller found Security Chief Robinson, who explained the situation. The simulated medical and engineering staff were fighting, and the two factions were coming close to blows. There was a reactor leak, and Kellerman, the apprentice to the head of engineering, had run in to fix it, and was dead. In response to these events, Dr. Loris, the head of medical, had refused to send aid to the engineer, and had in fact quarantined the reactor area. Brass, the head of engineering, accused Dr. Loris of murder, and days later, Estella, an assistant to Dr. Loris, went missing, leading to accusations of a revenge killing. With this information in hand, the Vault Dweller descended into the atrium and began to question the Mr. Handys playing their roles. Dr. Loris explained that he had sealed the reactor area to prevent others from becoming sickened or dying due to the leak. He suggested that head engineer Brass was paranoid and fixated on revenge. If the overseer approved, Loris suggested that he could put Brass under medical supervision. Head engineer Brass, on the other hand, maintained his position that leaving Kellerman in the reactor area was murder. As for the missing medical assistant Estella, Brass claimed that his people had nothing to do with it, and further, that his crew had searched the entire vault looking for her. The entire vault aside from the quarantined reactor area, that was. Unlike Dr. Loris, Brass wasn't looking for his opponent to be detained. He wanted him exposed as a bad actor. Feeling a need to examine the reactor area, the Vault Dweller demanded the key from Dr. Loris. Loris refused, claiming that the radiation would kill them. At this point, the Overseer chimed in that she and the Vault Dweller could probably find the key within the medical section or just pick the lock on the reactor area. They found the key on the floor in the back of the room and proceeded to the reactor area. Here they found, side by side, the bodies of Engineering Assistant Kellerman and Medical Assistant Estella. Thanks to a holotape recording Estella had, the Vault Dweller discovered the truth of events. The reactor had been in much worse shape than originally thought. Kellerman had to fix it as quickly as possible to keep it from killing everyone in the vault. He was only able to do so thanks to Estella treating him with enough radaway to survive the process long enough to complete his work. In the end, both Kellerman and Estella died to save the vault. The Vault Dweller brought this holotape back to Security Chief Robinson, who in turn called Dr. Loris and Engineer Brass together to share this news with them. Brass and Loris learned the lesson of working together to keep the vault running properly, and with that, the Vault Dweller passed their exam. On returning to Professor Bott, the Vault Dweller was named a graduate of VTU and was granted access to the Restricted Wing. This area was accessed through a hidden maintenance area in the test vault. Together, the Vault Dweller and the Overseer returned to the test vault and made their way into the hidden maintenance area. Despite the access granted by Professor Bott, they were attacked by security robots in this section. After clearing the way forward, they finally arrived at the entrance to the secret Restricted Wing of Vault-Tec University. Within, they found a film presentation dedicated to Vault 79. The story it told revealed that the rumored treasure wasn't just real, it was unbelievably valuable. The vault's number was not a coincidence. 79 is the atomic number of the material it safeguarded: gold. While this was a promising start, the film soon made clear that the gold this vault held was the entirety of America's gold reserve, transferred from Fort Knox just before the bombs. This massive stockpile of gold had been intended by the federal government to serve as a backing for a new American economy in the aftermath of the war. The fact that this plan was becoming known a full 26 years after the bombs made it clear that things were not going according to that plan. Despite this disappointment, the massive accumulation of material wealth could still be used by the 76ers for its original purpose. For that to happen though, the 76ers were first going to need to get into the vault, and that was not something the Overseer and the Vault Dweller could do on their own. They were going to need help. The Vault Dweller departed VTU and returned to Page at Foundation, bringing with them the plans for the vault in the hope of enticing him to cooperate on gaining access to the treasure within. Initially, Page was confused, and he assumed that the Vault Dweller wanted the settlers to build the vault in the plans. When the Vault Dweller revealed the contents of the vault, Page was interested, not so much in the abstract of restoring commerce, but more so in terms of what the gold could do for his people. That said, he was concerned with how they would get into the vault, much less deal with the laser tripwires and deadly security turrets within. When he suggested using a drill to gain access, the Vault Dweller remembered the Motherlode, an enormous autonomous drill manufactured by the mining and automation company Hornwright Industrial. Page thought that might work for the job and told the Vault Dweller if they obtained the drill, he would be open to a discussion on a heist. With that, the Vault Dweller departed Foundation once more, this time heading for Hornwright Industrial's Charleston headquarters. They had visited the site before, and it was on one of those visits that they had learned the story of Hornwright Industrial and their amazing Motherlode Drill. For generations, Hornwright Industrial and Garahan Mining had been the two great family-owned mining corporations of Appalachia. Thanks to the great size and wealth of their companies, these two families employed most of the miners in the region, leaving just a few mines here and there run by smaller outfits. These corporations not only mined the minerals, but they also developed new technologies to make their miners more efficient. Though over the years, the development of these technologies had led to a need for a smaller and smaller workforce, both corporations recognized the importance of keeping high-quality, effective miners on staff. That mindset came to an end with the rise of Daniel Hornwright to the position of CEO of Hornwright Industrial. While Daniel's father had said, "Your products are only as good as the people who build them," Daniel believed that automated labor was the future, and he was going to prepare for that future. It was with this mindset that he collaborated with RobCo on the production of the Autominer, a Protectron variant made specifically to replace human miners. The Autominer proved to be a massive success, easily removing humans from the actual work of mining. This isn't to say that every human working for Hornwright Industrial was out of a job. They still needed people to maintain the Autominers and ship the already mined materials out, but Daniel had those workers in his sights as well, as he planned to automate every job in the company by 2100. When his Autominers faced their first real threat, he was ready to fight that challenge with every available option. The challenge was quite literal in this case, the man versus machine event. Vivian Garahan, the CEO of Garahan Mining at the time, wanted to do everything she could to save the jobs of human miners. The problem was, Autominers were better at mining. Her solution? The Excavator Power Armor, a civilian version of the power armor the Army was using to make great gains in the war with China. Human miners were more mentally competent and flexible than Autominers. They just didn't have the strength and endurance to match them. She hoped the Excavator Power Armor would give human miners the edge they needed to beat the machines. She hired a military expert in the construction of power armor and devoted massive resources to the task. She then challenged Hornwright Industrial to the man versus machine event, a 24-hour mining battle that pitted a team of Hornwright's Autominers against a team of Garahan's human miners and Excavator Power Armor. Daniel wasn't going to leave the outcome of this event up to chance, so he dispatched his Vice President of Corporate Engagement, Dutch Wharton, to make sure the Autominers came out on top. Garahan Mining found themselves the victims of sabotage. Generators were disconnected, fires were started in filing cabinets. Hornwright Industrial even managed to get their hands on a full set of schematics on the Excavator Power Armor. In the end, Hornwright's Autominers won, and Garahan was effectively shamed into leasing Autominers from Hornwright to make up for the lost resources spent on the Excavator Power Armor. Not content with simply automating away all mining jobs in Appalachia, Daniel Hornwright set about automating the entire government of the state of West Virginia. Ballot Measure 6, also known as the Appalachian Prosperity Act, would replace all government workers over 10 years. Daniel was a big booster of this plan, which isn't at all surprising when you consider that the state would be purchasing a lot of equipment from Hornwright Industrial along the way. When Senator Sam Blackwell challenged the measure as it would eliminate thousands of jobs, Daniel Hornwright sicked his fixer, Harper Rosiak, on the senator. By threatening the senator's daughter's life, Rosiak managed to scare him into hiding, removing the last real roadblock to the APA. As anti-automation protests continued to build against Hornwright Industrial, Mr. Hornwright took new approaches to the problem. When protesters went home for the day, he purchased more land, moving the property line back, so that those protesters could be arrested for trespassing when they showed up again the next day. He had 2 protesters that threw tomatoes at his daughter's limousine arrested for assault. When Hornwright's strikebreakers refused to remove striking workers from his property, he teamed with RobCo to create a force of robotic strikebreakers. Even the anti-labor force was automated out of a job. The culmination of Daniel Hornwright's efforts in mining and automation was to be the Motherlode project. Originally, it seems that this project was a multi-platform operation. Having learned of the existence of vertibirds from his contacts in the Defense Department, Daniel came up with an idea of a vertibird with ore detection capabilities that would direct mining operations. Whether or not this ore detection technology was stolen from Garahan, we'll probably never know. Regardless, in the end, Daniel Hornwright decided upon a single platform to accomplish his dreams of a fully automated mining operation. He devoted the entirety of his personal team of researchers to the project. Jose Brigada came up with the first designs, combining the company's expertise in drilling technology, ore detection, and automation. These Motherlode machines would tunnel through the earth searching for ore, mine the ore, and return it to Hornwright Industrial without any human input. After a time, Mr. Hornwright even poached a young researcher from Atomic Mining Services' Electronic Intelligence Division, whom he introduced to his skeptical team as the future of mining as we know it. Though they didn't believe that this young woman with only 1 PhD from a state school would be a worthy contributor, she ended up making all the difference. In just 4 weeks, she managed to solve 3 outstanding issues on the project, and even provided the machine with an in-field self-repair system that was able to operate without interrupting the machine's operations. The team continued working to improve the systems of the Motherlode without direct supervision until late summer 2077. That August, Evelyn Hornwright, Daniel's wife, passed away after a long battle with cancer. In the aftermath of this terrible event, Daniel threw himself into the Motherlode project to avoid being broken by grief. Over the next 2 months, he worked on the project incessantly, avoiding everything else. When vague rumors of the project spread and Charleston Herald reporter Bill Breyer showed up asking what the Motherlode project was, Daniel became paranoid. He believed one of his researchers had been leaking information. Though turned away empty-handed, Breyer attempted to infiltrate a Hornwright testing site and was shot by security for his trouble. When a member of the PR department came to Mr. Hornwright concerned with how this would be viewed, Daniel fired the man on the spot. He had grown to despise what he saw as weakness in his executives. In his journal, he simply noted that he wished his security team had been robotic, as they wouldn't have needlessly shot the man. One who has experienced robotic security might be excused for thinking that robotic security would have been more likely to shoot. Regardless, when labor riots that bordered on open rebellion took place in southern Appalachia, Daniel saw it as further confirmation that his Motherlode was a vital technology to eliminate human labor from his company. By late October 2077, the Motherlodes were practically ready to go. Unfortunately for Daniel, the completion of his magnum opus also coincided with the end of the world. In the aftermath of the bombs, the Hornwrights had disappeared, leaving 4 Motherlode robots behind to wander subterranean Appalachia. The Vault Dweller had met one of these 4 on their last visit to Hornwright Industrial, when they had access to a subterranean testing chamber and helped it to repair itself. Upon reaching that chamber again, the Vault Dweller attempted to summon the massive drill to them, only to learn that the machine was heading for a new signal. A new signal originating from the Hornwright State Safe Room. Thanks to the Vault Dweller's previous trips to the Hornwright HQ, they already had a key to the estate, and had made use of it in the past. They departed immediately for the old Hornwright estate in Brommel to determine the origin of the signal now pursued by the Motherlode. Upon arriving at the Hornwright estate, the Vault Dweller discovered that the elevator now not only ascended to the estate, but also descended to a heretofore unknown safe room. Unfortunately, their keycard to the estate in general didn't match the safe room specifically. Thus, they rode the elevator up to the residential section of the estate, and began the search for proper credentials. After a thorough search of the site, battling security robots all along the way, they finally found the means to print a new copy of the necessary keycard in the room that had belonged to Daniel Hornwright's daughter, Penelope. From what the Vault Dweller had learned of Penelope Hornwright, they knew she was an impressive woman. She had attended VTU, where she double majored in business administration and geological science. Over the summers of her junior and senior years, she had interned with Hornwright Industrial and Atomic Mining Services. In 2070, she graduated VTU summa cum laude and went to work for Hornwright Industrial. Though she may have gained her position through nepotism, she was certainly equal to the tasks of her role, and she worked hard, providing excellent value to the company. When her mother, Evelyn Hornwright, passed away, Penelope was sad, but she had accepted her death well before it came, and in fact was happy that her mother was no longer living a life connected to a bunch of machines. Seeing her father grow more reclusive and paranoid in the Motherlode project, she was concerned, not just for him, but because his pet project, about which she knew very little, was eating up their operating capital. She effectively ran the company through this time and steered Hornwright Industrial through the chaos of the October riots. When it came to printing the keycard on Penelope's computer, the Vault Dweller found that they needed to enter the right code. In the end, the code happened to be the date of Evelyn Hornwright's death, August 23rd, 2077. With the new keycard in hand, the Vault Dweller descended into the depths of Hornwright's mansion, seeking after one of the family's most impressive creations. When they exited the elevator and opened the safe room with their newly acquired keycard, the Vault Dweller found themselves face to face not only with the Motherlode, but with Penelope Hornwright. The Vault Dweller soon learned that in the aftermath of the war, Penelope Hornwright fled Appalachia and lived a nomadic life with her family. Sometime around 2083 to 2084, she gave birth to a daughter. The Vault Dweller had known that despite the rivalry with Garahan Mining, Penelope Hornwright had been in love with Bryce Garahan, the son of the CEO and the heir apparent. Regardless of whether this child was a product of that union or not, wandering the wasteland of post-apocalyptic America was no way to raise a child, and thus Penelope looked for a safe place for her little girl. When the family came across a vault with a malfunctioning door, Penelope thought she had found the perfect place to safely raise a child. She made a deal with the Vault Dwellers. She would fix their door and they would let her family join them within. When she realized that holding up her end of the bargain would require her to incur a lethal dose of radiation, she bid her family adieu and made the repairs with the belief that she was sacrificing herself for them. The fact that she ended up ghoulified instead of dead was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. She usually avoided settlements, as in those days when the New World was young, all ghouls were viewed as monsters. Many communities had a shoot-on-sight policy for ghouls, and thus few were aware that some of them had retained their sentience, though they had lost their noses. Though she had managed to insinuate herself into a few communities by keeping her face covered, she was always eventually discovered, and exile was the merciful outcome of those interactions. Sometime around 2102 to 2103, she decided it was time to go home, and thus she returned to Appalachia. She saw Foundation from a distance and considered trying the old trick of wearing a mask, but decided against it. She wanted to find someplace safe, as ever since she had re-entered the region, she was being chased by something. She didn't know what it was, but she could tell from the trembling ground that it was massive. Hoping that the safe room in the old family estate would be enough to protect her, she returned to Brommel. When the Motherlode burst forth and revealed itself to be Penelope's unseen pursuer, she was indignant that the robot would dare enter her safe room without permission. She was also confused by the fact that it was speaking to her over the local speaker system. It seems that when her father had worked on the Motherlode, he hadn't thought it needed any means of speaking on its own. Having finally found a Hornwright after a quarter century without direction, the Motherlode asked for the location of its primary user, Daniel Hornwright. Penelope responded that her father had been gone for years, leading the Motherlode to immediately request that Penelope accept authority over itself. A bit bewildered, Penelope took ownership of the Motherlode. With one intruder dealt with, she turned to the Vault Dweller to figure out what they were doing in her home. The Vault Dweller explained their need for the Motherlode as a means to drill into Vault 79. She agreed to help the Vault Dweller guide the Motherlode into the vault, so long as the new society they were hoping to build would accept ghouls. They accepted this, and thus Penelope started planning. The main problem the Motherlode had was that it was difficult to direct to a specific location without placing a beacon there. This wouldn't work, as if they could place a beacon inside the vault, they wouldn't need the Motherlode. Penelope believed that she could coax the Motherlode in the right direction if she had two things, a custom Pip-Boy and the schematic for a circuit she had helped design decades prior. With a plan starting to come together, the Vault Dweller departed for the first spot on their shopping list, Summersville. Here lay the house of the former grad student Aaliyah, the primary designer of the circuit schematic Penelope requested. After wiping out the feral ghouls infesting the house, the Vault Dweller found the schematic in question within the basement workshop. With this in hand, they moved on to VTU to find a Pip-Boy construction kit. Though they had offered Penelope the use of their Pip-Boy, she needed one of her own, as she was going to have to make some modifications to make it work as a mobile terminal for the Motherlode. Upon arriving at VTU, the Vault Dweller entered the same hidden wing they had visited with the Overseer when learning about the nature of Vault 79. Dodging an angry security assaultron, the Vault Dweller grabbed the construction kit and shot out of the school as fast as their legs would carry them. Upon returning to Penelope in the safe room, the Vault Dweller learned that Penelope had added a voice synthesizer to the Motherlode. No more would it have to be in range of a Hornwright speaker to be heard. Unfortunately, she had found significant damage when she was doing her work on the robotic drill. It needed new parts, specifically an interpolator, a sensor module, and an altimeter. As luck would have it, her estate was the perfect source for both the sensor and the altimeter, as there were iBots and an old Stingray jet there for each part respectively. As for the interpolator, the Dweller would have to strip it from a robo-brain. Before departing to gather the required parts, they provided Penelope with a plan to salvage the existing altimeter with some Abraxo and a little elbow grease. With that, they headed back up the elevator. After dealing with a definitely not Bethesda'd out assaultron and gathering a sensor module from the Hornwright estate, the Vault Dweller headed over the mountains to the RobCo Facility in Virginia. At the garage entrance to the site, they quickly dispatched a pair of robo-brains and collected the interpolator from one before turning back towards Bromwell. Penelope took the requested parts from the Vault Dweller upon their return, and promised to join them at Foundation once she had finished installing the parts and gathering a few things she needed from the estate. The Vault Dweller made their way back to Founders Hall, intent on bringing the good news of the Motherlode and its ghoul shepherd that would soon be joining them at Foundation, only to discover that Dr. Hornwright had beaten them there, and was rapidly setting up a laboratory. With the Vault Dweller having succeeded in this initial effort, Page was ready to start talking business. He explained that he'd been considering what to do about the laser grids when Jin, one of their scavengers, had come forward claiming to have a solution. Page sent the Vault Dweller off to meet with Jin while he worked on the problem of what to do about the Vault's security turrets. On Page's recommendation, the Vault Dweller headed towards Jin's quarters within Founders Hall. Jin was a child of the post-apocalypse, growing up with her mother and father in the capital wasteland, surviving by scavenging the remains of the old world. Upon joining the settlers of Foundation, she became one of their best scavengers. She had both overheard the plan to raid Vault 79 and had a solution to the laser grid problem. The Vault Dweller struck up a conversation with Jin in which she cryptically claimed that she had a plan to obtain some invisible and undetectable piece of tech. To find this tech, they would need another piece of tech with the same origin that was visible. In the end, she revealed that the visible tech was a Liberator bot, and the invisible tech, a spy suit. Both of these technologies originated from the spy program of the Communist Chinese. She explained that Liberators not only could see spy suits, but they would ping each other when they did. This meant that if the Vault Dweller could bring her a Liberator, that it might have the logs of any recent encounters between the local Liberator bots and any passing spy suits. The Vault Dweller was aware of the Liberator bots as they had explored the source of these bots in the past year. Originally developed to serve as a vanguard force for a full-scale Chinese invasion, these bots had been undergoing a process of improvement in the Chinese intelligence base beneath the Mama Dolce's food processing plant in Morgantown. Despite the intimidating paint job and inspirational dialogue protocol developed in that base, these little green chittering robots had been nothing more than a minor annoyance to the Vault Dweller since they had first encountered them just outside the vault on Reclamation Day. Having been informed that they were going to be working with robots, the Vault Dweller told Jin that she should check in with Penelope Hornwright. Her autodidactical knowledge of robotics would undoubtedly come in handy. Jin was excited by this news as her understanding of programming was lacking. Beyond this, she had hoped that they might get the old Hornwright air purifiers working, and Penelope would be just the person to offer support on that. With the plan of capturing a Liberator bot, the Vault Dweller departed Foundation and headed to the Charleston train yard. This site had become a haven for Liberator bots ever since some of them had been shipped down the rail line from Morgantown. The Vault Dweller quickly disabled one of the bots, threw it in their backpack, and headed back up into the mountains. When they returned to Foundation, the Vault Dweller found Jin working with Dr. Hornwright in her workshop. After years without a home, Penelope had truly settled in Foundation. She'd even brought her cat Tutti Frutti along. Taking the incapacitated robot from the Vault Dweller, Penelope began to inspect the Liberator's code with Jin. They found that the bot's code was, of course, in Chinese. This would have been a dead end if not for Jin translating the words Baiyu Inchuan into White Fountainhead or White Spring. The revelation that Jin spoke and read Chinese was soon followed by the confession that her parents had both been Chinese spies before the war. When the bombs came down and they watched the American government collapse, they assumed that the same fate had befallen their own government. Free from the rules against fraternization imposed by their old bosses, they settled down together in the capital wasteland, and Jin was born soon after. The family had lived together until Jin's mother disappeared one day without a trace. Though Jin had eventually gone on to join the settlers, she had never given up the search for her mother. For the first time, she had a lead. The Liberator they had captured had a log of Jin's mother's spy suit being detected near the 7th hole of the White Spring golf course. Jin explained that the spy suits were locked to genetic profiles, meaning it was surely her mother who was wearing it. If Jin and the Vault Dweller could find her mother's old suit, Jin's DNA might be close enough that she could use it. Though Jin was concerned that this revelation of her past might cause Penelope to reject her, Dr. Hornwright didn't care. If anything, the news excited her. The opportunity to work with spy gadgets was a dream for her. In a flash, Penelope had the damaged Liberator bot modified to track down Jin's mother's spy suit. She dispatched the Vault Dweller to the White Spring. As they left, Jin went to have a chat with Paige about her past now that it was out in the open, and luckily, he also wasn't concerned about her heritage. With Jin monitoring the situation remotely, the Vault Dweller arrived at the 7th hole and deployed the recalibrated Liberator. The robot began to race to the southwest, with the Vault Dweller following as close as they could. As they neared the perimeter of the resort, the bot weaved its way through an ongoing battle between the White Springs security robots and a handful of angry bears. As the Liberator made its way past the old perimeter wall of the White Spring, it picked up more and more Chinese signatures. Realizing they were nearing their quarry, Jin announced that she was on her way. Unfortunately, the Vault Dweller had angered the resort's defenders with an errant shot meant to assist them in their battle with the bears. As the last of the Ursine assault force fell, the automated security turned their sights on the Vault Dweller. Wanting to avoid entanglement with the heavily armed and armored robots, the Vault Dweller sprinted after the Liberator and practically dove down the hatch the small robot had located nearby. Now safe from their pursuers, the Vault Dweller found themselves in a heretofore unknown cave system. They followed a narrow passage until it opened into a cavernous room that provided an almost unbelievable sight. Under the high domed ceiling of the chamber, there lay a lake of glowing green material of unknown composition. At the center of the lake rose an island capped with a strange red building. The island was accessed via a series of catwalks along the cavern walls and a bridge over the glowing lake. As the Vault Dweller approached, cannons atop the structure fired hostile Liberator bots at them that deployed on landing and began to assault the intruder. Over the coming minutes, the Vault Dweller battled their way to the island and discovered that they had stumbled upon a full-scale and operational Chinese intelligence base. The initial hostile greeting offered by the Liberators was soon added to by a host of communist ghouls. The battle continued into the base itself, culminating with a fight against the power armor-clad commanders running the site. With the communist soldiers dead, the Vault Dweller began to examine the site and discovered that it was referred to by the Chinese as the Motherlode acquisition site. The Chinese were aware of Daniel Hornwright's efforts and were interested in getting their hands on the prototypes. They had used these prototypes to dig a series of tunnels across Appalachia for reasons unknown. After ascertaining this knowledge, the Vault Dweller descended into the facility where they found a ghoul woman in stealth armor who told them in English that she didn't want to fight. As the Vault Dweller spoke with her, she revealed herself to be at the site against her will, and further, that she was Jin's mother, Agent Mochu. When Jin arrived, she was shocked. It had been 11 years since her mother had disappeared without a trace. She had expected to find the suit discarded or affixed to her mother's corpse. She was both amazed and hurt that her mother was alive after all these years apart. To Jin, it seemed that her mother had abandoned her out of some sense of patriotism. She was so hurt that she claimed to be okay with the idea of the Vault Dweller killing her mother and taking the suit. Luckily, cooler heads prevailed and this confrontation didn't turn to matricide. Mochu explained that if Jin and the Vault Dweller took her suit and used it, they would become targets of her masters. They might be able to use the suit only 1 or 2 times before they would come for it, and kill Jin in the process of recovering it. This was an obvious problem, but the Vault Dweller believed that Penelope Hornwright could find a shielding mechanism to counter their tracking ability. With access to the suit secured, the Vault Dweller left Jin to reunite with her mother in private and headed back to Foundation. When the Vault Dweller returned to Foundation, they found Jin once again hanging out in Dr. Hornwright's lab. Jin explained that she had the suit and the heist planning could again move forward. In the end, Jin learned what had happened all those years ago when her mother left. Though the old world had died on October 23, 2077, some of its institutions had survived. Just as the American Enclave had continued to operate, so too did the Chinese spy agency. When Mochu, her husband, and Jin had been living in the capital wasteland, a visitor from their old life dropped by and made a threat. Return to duty, or I'll kill your family. To keep her family safe and free, Mochu had put the old stealth suit back on and gone back to work for her handlers. Once the suit was back on, she didn't have a choice in following orders. It locked her in and made her location permanently trackable. Further, it was equipped with technology that could kill her if she disobeyed. The year after Mochu had disappeared, Jin's father had perished in a raider ambush while hunting for his wife. For now, Jin and her mother had parted ways. Jin felt that she had to talk to Paige about her mother joining them at Foundation before simply bringing her in. She had a price on her head, so there was always a chance that her presence would serve to turn Foundation into a target. At the earliest, she would join them at Foundation after the successful entry to Vault 79. Before returning to Paige, the Vault Dweller and Jin had discussed the Liberator bot that had led them to the communist base. Though it had been damaged, Jin managed to recover it, and she and Penelope were going to turn it into a basic lab assistant. Lastly, Jin thanked the Vault Dweller for helping her reconnect with her mother, with a set of plans with which they could make their own Chinese stealth armor. With that, the Vault Dweller left Jin behind and returned to Paige. With both entering the vault and dealing with the security laser grids dealt with, Paige only had one concern remaining: the security turrets. Though he didn't know what to do about them, he thought he knew someone with the expertise they needed. These people Paige had in mind weren't settlers, but they had been shadowing them since their years in the pit. Paige had already contacted them, and they were willing to meet, but they wanted to get a feel for the Vault Dweller before they agreed to assist them. He made sure to tell the Vault Dweller that there was a specific protocol to meeting these specialists that started with waving the American flag in sight of their compound. With that, he sent the Vault Dweller to a meeting in the mire. The Vault Dweller made their way to the river's edge by the old Valley Galleria Mall. They'd been here a few times in the past year, and on this visit, discovered that someone had indeed made some changes to the area. Across the river, the ransacked bunker that had once belonged to the Free State of Jeremiah had some new decorations that included a number of the ringed five-pointed stars of the old U.S. Army. When the Vault Dweller found the flag that Paige had mentioned, they waved it vigorously. In response to the signal, a voice came over the local intercom inviting the Vault Dweller to cross the river towards the old bunker. After disposing of a few mutated mosquitoes, they waded across the stagnant river to reach the northern shore. At close range, it became clear that the shelter had U.S. Army stenciled above the door. Upon entering the bunker, the Vault Dweller found that the interior decor had a decidedly less anti-government feel to it than it had under its previous ownership. Descending to the main floor of the bunker, they found three figures in military fatigues, two men and a woman. One of the men stood by a table, while the other two sat by it with a dog at their feet. Though the Vault Dweller didn't know it yet, this trio was all that remained of the Old Guard. Also known as the 3rd Infantry Regiment in the time before the war, the Old Guard had served ceremonial purposes up to and including as the honor guard for the president. These three, Captain Fields, Sergeant Radcliffe, and Sergeant Thompson, had been carrying out a mission in Appalachia at the time of the bombs. In the aftermath of the war, they had moved north and encountered Paige's settlers near the pit. Because they were still on their mission and didn't want to endanger the settlers, they had remained separated from them but had stayed nearby in case they needed help. Private Lucky, the dog in their party, was all that remained of Sergeant Thompson's trio of trained attack dogs, as they'd lost a pair in the escape from the pit. That event had scarred them all, and privately, they were considering resigning from what must have been one of the last remaining military units of the original United States Army. For the moment, though, they had once again settled down near the settlers, here in the mire east of Foundation. The man standing by the table politely introduced himself as Captain Oliver Fields, before demanding to know why the Vault Dweller was attempting to steal America's gold reserves. When the Vault Dweller explained the plan to restart commerce, Captain Fields mockingly questioned them on why they should be the ones in charge of an operation as important as that. When the Vault Dweller revealed themselves to be a defender of the people, Captain Fields' demeanor softened slightly, and he asked the Vault Dweller to reveal the true primary mission of their vault. While Vault 76's public mission had been the preservation of the best and brightest of America for the rebuilding of the nation, they did have another mission kept secret from the masses. The Overseer had been ordered to seize control of Appalachia's automated nuclear missile silos in the aftermath of the bombs from whoever claimed authority over them, and to hold them in the name of Vault-Tec. When the Vault Dweller revealed this to Captain Fields, he was reasonably content with the response, as he knew that Vault-Tec wasn't what they had publicly pretended to be, and this confirmed to him that the Vault Dweller was being forthcoming. He then asked his companions for their thoughts on the Vault Dweller, and they expressed a mild approval of them. With his first interview complete and having built a small amount of trust with their conversation, Captain Fields moved into a discussion of the issue that had brought the Vault Dweller to them, the raid on Vault 79. Luckily, the Old Guard did have expertise with security turrets, including the special turrets in Vault 79 specifically, allowing them to provide some insight. Captain Fields turned the conversation over to their expert on the topic, Sergeant Radcliffe. The sergeant detailed the features of these deadly turrets before suggesting a means at beating them with their own tech. These turrets were made by RobCo, and a quick trip to the local RobCo office could be all that it would take to bring them down. Sergeant Radcliffe agreed to meet the Vault Dweller at the old robotics manufacturer, and they departed separately. This RobCo office played a definitive role in the history and current state of the region. It was from here that RobCo collaborated with Atomic Mining Services in the establishment of Watoga. Intended to serve as a model of what cities would be like in the future, Watoga was built with every technological benefit available by the time the bombs came down. Robots did everything for the residents, all the way down to work that was usually reserved for charitable volunteers. Unfortunately, this high standard of living, a lack of jobs, and an exclusionary community kept all but the wealthiest and best connected from living within the city. Meanwhile, the primary developers of the city, Atomic Mining Services, experimented with subterranean atomic mining in the area. Though this did yield the extremely power-dense and valuable ultrasite, the blasts also destabilized the ground so badly that the local poor in the bog town found their houses condemned. One of those locals was Scott Turner, who was living in a trailer by fall 2077. Even working as an integral programmer with RobCo with good pay wasn't enough for Scott to pass the gatekeepers of Watoga. His frustration with the elites of the city led him to plot a revolution against their system. His plan? Write an update for all the robots in Watoga so that the next time they were patched, they would work on a whitelist system. The only one on the whitelist? Scott. His update was intended to get the bots operating Watoga to escort the populace out, giving him the opportunity to choose the residents of the city, starting with his friends and family. This update went horribly wrong. On Friday, October 22nd, 2077, instead of peacefully escorting the civilian population out of Watoga, the robots began to kill them. The people fled into the forest around the city as the military established a cordon around the war zone that was Watoga. The next day, the bombs came down. Amid the chaos, Scott had collapsed on the floor of his trailer. Unable to get back to his office to fix the problem, he left an apology and instructions on how to add oneself to the Watoga whitelist. It had been in following his instructions that the Vault Dweller had made the streets of Watoga walkable again for the first time in 25 years, at least for themselves. On arriving at this site that had once caused the robotic revolt of Watoga, the Vault Dweller made their way inside. In the lobby, they met Sergeant Radcliffe, and they went over the simple plan of searching through research projects housed at the site. The facility was filled with hostile robots that fought the pair every step. Together, they made their way towards the lab's deepest in the facility. There they found a RoboBrain assembly area, including a RoboBrain that was complete save for the brain. Sergeant Radcliffe suggested the Vault Dweller find an on-site brain storage area so that they might complete it. The Vault Dweller searched through their records and discovered that the entire research team had removed their brains for use in RoboBrains. Along with this revelation were the instructions on preparing a stored brain for use in a RoboBrain. The Vault Dweller and the Sergeant left the RoboBrain assembly area and fought their way to brain storage. Here they found three options: brains belonging to Gina, Greg, and Dr. Diaz. The descriptions of these three brains held that the previous owners were sad, competent, and crazy in respective order. The Vault Dweller was feeling adventurous that day, so they went with the brain-damaged but brilliant Dr. Diaz. As the brains needed to be mildly seared to get them working again, the Vault Dweller and Sergeant Radcliffe reviewed the cooking instructions and cooked their crazy brain for 3 seconds at 41 degrees in a neutral pH fluid. After preparing the brain, they poured it into a new brain dome and attached that to the RoboBrain chassis in the assembly area. With a triumphant shout from the RoboBrain, Dr. Dorothea Diaz was reborn. When asked about bypassing her turrets, she declared it was impossible. Her work was perfect. Only she could beat her own work. Deciding to give herself a challenge, the newly robotic doctor rolled down the hall with a maniacal laugh and started work immediately. The Vault Dweller and the sergeant defended the robotic doctor as she worked, holding off wave after wave of security robots. In the end, Dr. Diaz created a tool that allowed for the deactivation of her old turrets. With their objective in hand, they departed the RobCo facility, leaving Dr. Diaz to build a new evil robotic empire in peace. When the Vault Dweller returned to the bunker, Captain Fields informed them that the old guard would be packing up and heading over to Foundation soon. The Vault Dweller had impressed them, and they were on board for the raid on Vault 79. Leaving the bunker behind, the Vault Dweller headed back to Foundation. With Penelope in the Motherlode Drill, Jin in her stealth suit, and Sergeant Radcliffe in his turret tool, the settlers of Foundation were ready to begin the heist. When the Vault Dweller returned to Foundation, Page expressed his high regard for them, as he was impressed that they had managed to finally get the old guard to join directly with the settlers rather than simply shadow them. With the crew and equipment ready to go, Page told the Vault Dweller the team was ready whenever they were comfortable launching the assault on the vault. As their own affairs were in order, the Vault Dweller was ready to go, and thus they headed for the basement of Freddy Fear's House of Scares in the Northern Mire, from which the vault raid would proceed. Upon arrival, it was clear that something was amiss. Penelope Hornwright was missing. She was supposed to be guiding the Motherlode. Without her, there could be no heist. Upon conferring with Page again, it was clear that no one knew where she was. As if on cue, a radio broadcast came in from Dr. Hornwright. She had been kidnapped by members of the Raiders of the Crater. Though they arrived in the area around the same time as the settlers of Foundation, the trip to Appalachia had been a homecoming for the Raiders. From 2078 to around 2096, the core of this group had been known as the Diehards, one of the 5 Raider gangs of the Savage Divide. A splinter of the main gang, David Thorpe's Cutthroats, the Diehards were the least threatening of the Raider groups of post-war Appalachia. While all of the gangs survived by robbing passing caravans and raiding settlements, the Diehards tried to do this without engaging in violence. This didn't work out in most cases, and violence was the usual outcome for their attempted robberies. When the post-war society crumbled in the face of the oncoming Scorched Plague, Scorched and Scorched Beasts, a large chunk of the Diehards splintered off and fled Appalachia. Led by Meg, these raiders wandered the wastes, looting and recruiting for around 7 years. When they heard the rumors of treasure, they had returned to Appalachia and set themselves up in the crashed space station at the northern end of the Toxic Valley. They named their settlement Crater and began working to reclaim their home. When the Vault Dweller and the Overseer bottled the Scorched Plague inoculation, they had brought the medicine to both the settlers of Foundation and the Raiders of the Crater. Now members of that faction were holding Dr. Hornwright captive. Regardless of however it was that they had caught wind of the settlers' plans for the vault, they weren't going to let them move ahead unimpeded. They had kidnapped Penelope within the Hornwright Industrial Headquarters in Charleston, and were only willing to speak with the Vault Dweller, and only if they came alone. The Vault Dweller departed for Charleston, and upon their arrival at the HQ, they descended into the Motherlode testing area known as the Cave. Upon entering the area, the Vault Dweller was greeted by the head of this group of Crater Raiders, Hijack. Hijack had an ultimatum. Either the treasure in the vault was theirs, or it was no one's. The settlers would not be allowed to keep it. The Vault Dweller considered the problem and then offered a compromise. Hijack would get a share of the vault loot to take back to Crater. He would be lauded for having scored a share of the gold for his people despite having done none of the work to secure it. In exchange for this promised treasure, Hijack would release Penelope so that she could complete her part of the heist. Unfortunately, the Raiders hadn't waited patiently for the Vault Dweller, and they had in fact managed to damage the Motherlode during the kidnapping. Some of this damage was superficial, the damage to the intelligence module was not. Luckily, Penelope and the Vault Dweller hatched a plan to replace it. They would train a new intelligence module by walking it through the process of drilling in a simulated drilling experience. Over the course of a few minutes, they pushed through the training program, hitting, pushing, and even talking the fake rock walls down. When the course was complete, the module was ready for its new task. The Vault Dweller installed it on the Motherlode, and it tunneled off to the pre-planned meeting spot at Freddy Fear's House of Scares. With this, Dr. Hornwright and the Vault Dweller departed the cave as well. Upon returning to the basement of Freddy Fear's House of Scares, the Vault Dweller was happy to see all parties were present. Paige, Jen, Sergeant Radcliffe, Penelope Hornwright, and even the Motherlode were in place. The drill made its presence known with a gaping tunnel entrance in the rear wall of the basement, and the roar of its efforts echoing from the distance. The party followed the Motherlode in and found that the newly dug tunnel was filled with subterranean creatures, from mole miners to cave crickets, curious at the disruption. The tunnel passed from rock and stone into an old train tunnel packed with mole miners before returning to the soil beyond. Finally, the human heist crew members caught up with a Motherlode at the reinforced concrete wall of the vault. Motherlode had calculated that it would not survive tunneling through the vault's protective shell and expressed some trepidation at the prospect of death. As little as they wanted to, the Vault Dweller convinced the drill to continue on its path. Within seconds, the Motherlode passed into the vault and the party was confronted with terrible quantities of laser fire from the myriad turrets and robots inside. After successfully ridding the room of these defenders, the settlers had their beachhead in the vault. The next challenge fell upon Jin as they approached one of the vault's laser grids. Jin paused for a moment to ensure her mother's stealth armor was up to the challenge. If it failed when she was passing through the grids, she would be cut to pieces. After talking to Radcliffe and steadying her nerves, she cloaked and passed safely through to the other side. Having succeeded in her task, Jin's next objective was to open the way for the rest of the team. As she attempted to utilize a security terminal to turn the grid off, she touched off an alarm. Security robots poured in to reignite the fight for the beachhead. After a harrowing fight with these bots, Jin disarmed the laser grids and the party could move forward once more. Before they proceeded deeper in, Dr. Hornwright decided it was time for her to exit the vault. Her part of the heist was completed with the breaching of the vault. Beyond this, she wasn't much of a combatant, and her lab coat was poor protection against waves of hostile robots. Thus, she departed for Foundation, leaving the reduced party to press on to the so-called Hall of Death. Where the laser grid had been Jin's problem, it was now Sergeant Radcliffe's time to shine. Using the turret hacking tool obtained from RobCo, the sergeant managed to deactivate the numerous security turrets in the hall. Unfortunately, when he subsequently opened the door to the Hall of Death, the mounted guns reactivated and began to fire upon the settler party. While the heist crew took cover, Sergeant Radcliffe hacked into the grid, hoping to short out the electrical systems. As he worked frantically, security robots joined their stationary colleagues in attempting to push the invaders back out of the vault. Despite his claim of shorting out the turrets, Radcliffe actually managed to turn the turrets on the robots, and the powerful guns made quick work of their former allies. With the way cleared, the party pushed on to the atrium where they once again encountered hostile security turrets that were on a different circuit than those that had come before. Once they were taken care of, the Vault Dweller and their companions pushed into the atrium beyond. Here, they faced waves of security robots that culminated with a fight against a massive sentry bot. With another security barrier cleared, the party found themselves facing a sealed door. Radcliffe made his way to the Overseer's office, hoping to open a way forward. Though he succeeded and the passage opened, a party of feral ghouls poured into the atrium. After taking care of these unfortunate fellows, the Vault Dweller and the settlers moved on to the hallway from which the ghouls had come. They followed it to another door that, when opened, revealed a man in a black suit with black glasses standing behind a security station window. He had the appearance of a government agent, which was fitting as he, like all other dwellers of this vault, was a member of the Secret Service. The agent of the window, nicknamed Slick, was soon joined at the window by another agent, AC, who explained the situation at hand. Before the bombs, back when the gold had been transferred to the vault, the agents had been stationed there to protect the gold until the government came to claim it. For nearly 26 years, they had kept their duty and maintained the gold repository. 3 months prior to the heist, the agents had been performing maintenance on the reactor when it malfunctioned. Half of the population had been killed or converted into ghouls. Power levels were low, which kept the remaining agents sealed in a small section of the vault, and they were running out of food and water. Though the agents remained loyal to their mission and would never normally consider letting the gold out of the vault for anyone other than the United States government, AC recognized how perilous their situation was, and thus he made a deal with the party. The Secret Service would grant the settlers access to the gold if they restored power to the reactor. This was a deal of practicality if nothing else, as the gold was inaccessible without power. Together, the Vault Dweller, Jin, and Sergeant Radcliffe made their way to the reactor. At its entrance, they found another man in a black suit and sunglasses, but in this case, he was also a ghoul. Despite this, he wasn't hostile. Agent Chase, or Digger as he was known, had become a sentient ghoul. He explained the situation. The reactor was stable but offline, and so long as the ambient radiation in the chamber remained as high as it was, there was no getting it back online. Along with this, the reactor was swarming with feral ghouls that were once Digger's co-workers. Digger had considered venting the chamber to clear the radiation himself, but he feared that any additional dosage could turn him feral. The Vault Dweller, wearing their Chinese stealth armor, luckily a radiation-resistant outfit, made their way to the control room, fighting when they couldn't sneak past the ghouls and wendigos. Once in the control room, they activated the emergency ventilation, cleansing the room of radiation. With the radiation cleared, the reactors came back online and the security system rebooted. The ghouls were gone quickly. The Vault Dweller then destroyed the turrets and made their way to the gold processing room. Here they found 1,000 gold ingots, and somehow the party of 3 managed to pack up and carry that gold out. They made their way back to Digger, with whom they returned to AC. At the checkpoint, the agents nearly fired at Digger until the Vault Dweller explained the nature of ghouls to AC. The agents had been locked underground since the war, and the malfunctioning of the reactor had created the first ghouls they had ever come into contact with. The Vault Dweller vouched for Digger, securing a place for him with his old companions. With that, the conversation turned to the gold carried by the Vault Dweller, Jen, and Sergeant Radcliffe. The Secret Service still wanted the gold, but they weren't going to try to take it from the party by force. They offered a trade, gold for advanced military schematics. They wanted to enact the original plan for the Vault, establishing a new currency for the United States, rebuilding the economy, and with it, the country. Regardless of the desires of the Vault Dweller, it wasn't just their gold to trade. A lot of it, half at least, belonged to the settlers. AC told the Vault Dwellers that if they changed their minds, they could come see the agents and provided them with a key for easier access to the safe section of the vault. With that, they all walked to the Gold Vault Operations Center and discovered that what they had found in the transfer room was a drop in the ocean of the real supply. It was here that Paige finally joined the Vault Dwellers' party. The Vault Dweller kept half of the gold, handed the settlers half the remaining gold, and left the last quarter to be collected by the Raiders of the Crater, as agreed to with Hijack. Though Paige was disappointed at the reduction in the size of their cut of the reward, he accepted the 250 bars of gold for Foundation. The Vault Dwellers celebrated their success with their companions. Jin was happily moving her mother, the one-time Chinese agent Mochu, into Foundation. Cognizant of the potential that her mother's former handlers might come for the suit, she had the plan of putting the stealth suit on a corpse and putting it to the torch. For his part, Sergeant Radcliffe was happy to say that the Old Guard would be sticking around Foundation, where they would oversee the settlement's security from then on. After concluding things with the party, the Vault Dweller took some time to gaze in wonder at the majesty of the view. Over the next few months, Appalachia entered a short-lived period of peace. In this time, Ward assigned Samuel the job of dealing with a gold trade that began because of the events at Vault 79. Once a Vault Dweller from an unnamed vault, Samuel had arrived in Foundation shortly after its founding, and since that time had worked odd jobs for Ward. The Vault Dwellers spent a good deal of time with their former heist members and helped the locals on a few missions of their own. On a seemingly daily basis, some piece of tech or another would be stolen from Foundation, and the Vault Dweller would help Ward to recover it. The first sign that the relative peace in the aftermath of the Vault raid wasn't to last came with a nearly indiscernible message crackling over the radio. It was soon revealed to be the voice of Paladin Layla Romani, head of the Brotherhood of Steel, 1st Expeditionary Force. Though the garbled message from the Brotherhood had put some wastelanders on edge, at least one settler of Foundation was ecstatic about their pending arrival. Russell Dorsey. Once a resident of Maryland, Dorsey had joined the settlers sometime after they had arrived in the region. While out exploring, he had come across the ruins of Fort Defiance, where the original Appalachian Brotherhood of Steel chapter had fought their last stand against the onslaught of the Scorched Beasts and their servants. Dorsey had always admired his father's naval service in the pre-war years, and he saw the Brotherhood as an extension of that honorable life. When the expedition's broadcast was first received, its full meaning wasn't easy to discern at first, but one thing was clear. They were laying claim to the Atlas Observatory. Once a laboratory where government scientists attempted to control the weather, the observatory had fallen into disrepair in the years since the war. Eager to assist the Brotherhood in any way possible, Russell Dorsey raced to the observatory and began to prepare it for their arrival. After restoring the site's robots and using them to automate the work of fortifying the facility, Dorsey put out a call for additional assistance. This request was answered by many of the former dwellers of Vault 76 who donated steel, concrete, cork, plastic, wood, cloth, leather, and glass to the project. When the Expeditionary Force arrived in the fall of 2103, they renamed the Atlas Observatory to Fort Atlas, and they thanked Russell Dorsey for his service by immediately providing the former settler with the rank of initiate. Back at Foundation, the settlers had undertaken an expansion project, constructing a brand new supply room. At the head of this new supply room were Gloria and Tad Chance, who, accompanied by their cat Sunny, not only kept an inventory of the settlers' goods, but also coordinated bulk trade deals to keep the settlers supplied. While these deals mostly concerned food goods, there were occasional weapon deals that took place as well. In the fall of 2103, Gloria and Tad made one such weapon deal, the purchase of a handful of incredible, high-tech missile launchers that looked like they would keep Foundation safe for the near future. Ward took the missile launchers and passed them out to a party of 5 settler guards for training purposes. It wasn't long after this party left for East Mountain Lookout that the Vault Dweller returned to Foundation. Now an initiate with the Brotherhood of Steel, the Vault Dweller was here on 2 missions for their new allies. First, they were there to secure a trade deal between the Brotherhood and the settlers. And second, they were searching for the missile launchers the settlers had just purchased. On their crossing from California, the Brotherhood's 1st Expeditionary Force had taken possession of a series of extremely powerful, high-tech missile launchers known as Hellstorm missile launchers. Subsequently, when they had come across a town anticipating a raider attack, the Brotherhood had handed these launchers out to the town's residents. The untrained citizen defenders weren't capable of properly utilizing the weapons, and the battle was a disaster. The Brotherhood lost a knight, possession of the Hellstorm missile launchers, and the town's population was reduced to that of 2 children. The launchers had been captured as spoils of war by the raiders and had recently arrived in Appalachia. After seizing a stock of these weapons from the Raiders of the Crater and the Blood Eagle Raiders, the Brotherhood had sent the Vault Dweller to seek out other stockpiles of the stolen weapons. Tad had seen the Brotherhood logo on the launchers and assumed that they had made them. When the Vault Dweller asked where the weapons were, Tad explained that the town watch was out training with them, while Gloria made sure that the Vault Dweller knew that whatever their origin, the settlers had paid for them, and they weren't something to be confiscated. Concerned that the town watch might face the same fate as the inexperienced villagers, the Vault Dweller raced for East Mountain Lookout. Upon arrival at the Old Forest Watch Station, the Vault Dweller found bodies and body parts strewn in and around a large crater. Through a holotape recording, the events of the previous hours were made clear. The watchmen had been preparing to evaluate their new arsenal when the mishandling of a launcher resulted in a misfire, rendering all but one of the squad dead. Mike Tiller, the cause of the misfire and sole survivor of the test, had fled the site with the launchers. By reading a terminal that had been left behind, the Vault Dweller was able to track Mike to Kerwood Mine. The Vault Dweller had explored Kerwood Mine the year before. There they had learned that prior to the bombs, the mine had been run by a fool who had obtained his job through nepotism. Despite this, the foreman, Sam Bailey, had managed to keep things going well enough until a week before the bombs. At that time, Atomic Mining Services conducted a chained series of subterranean detonations nearby that collapsed half the mine. The collapse buried workers, broke the sump pump system, and flooded the lower levels of the mine. Sam Bailey had remained in the mine when the world ended, and it was there that he recorded his experience of the oncoming nuclear winter of 2077 to 2078. The Vault Dweller wasn't the first member of the Brotherhood of Steel to explore the mine, as a scout for the original Appalachian Brotherhood had explored it years before the scorching. Once in the mine, the Vault Dweller found Mike Tiller hiding behind a security gate. When they tried to reason with him, he refused to come out and face the relatives of those he had accidentally killed. After swimming through the flooded mine and killing their way through an army of mole miners, the Vault Dweller found the back way into the room and confronted Mike Tiller again. This time, they managed to convince him to return to Foundation and face up to what had happened. The Vault Dweller carried the launchers back to Foundation's supply room. Gloria and Tad were horrified at the result of the test fire of the Hellstorm launcher, but they still felt they couldn't just hand them over. They had paid a lot for them, and they couldn't take that financial hit and still sign a trade deal with the Brotherhood. To cover their losses, the Vault Dweller paid them 2,500 caps from their own pocket. The trade deal secured, the Vault Dweller departed for Fort Atlas with the Hellstorm launchers in hand. Though the Vault Dweller would often visit Foundation over the coming months on their own accord, they wouldn't be back on Brotherhood business. In the closing days of 2103 and into 2104, there was an unexpected increase in attacks by super mutants. Not only was there an increase in the number of mutants, but in their intelligence as well. The Brotherhood of Steel was attacked from beneath by a party of them that had tunneled in. As these attacks spread across Appalachia, Foundation's scouts believed that they had identified at least one source to be uncanny caverns near Lewisburg. They brought this news to their old friend Russell Dorsey at Fort Atlas. While the Vault Dweller would be directly involved in the search for this site and in the follow-up investigation across Appalachia, Foundation had little to do with this fight. Aside from the attacks themselves, the only major impact of the mutant crisis on Foundation was a decline in the immigration to, and trade with, the settlement. Shortly before and during the super mutant attacks, there was a series of kidnappings that took place across the region. These kidnappings climaxed with the abduction of an entire Blue Ridge Caravan Company caravan. The Brotherhood tracked the mutants and the kidnappings to Vault 96 and Dr. Edgar Blackburn. Once a scientist with Westech, Dr. Blackburn had been attempting to restore the forced evolutionary virus, the source of the super mutants, to its original purpose, a cure for all disease. For months, Dr. Blackburn had been kidnapping test subjects, injecting them with mutated strains of FEV, and dumping them outside the vault when they began to transform. When kidnapping individual test subjects proved too slow, Dr. Blackburn hired the Hellcat mercenary company to kidnap groups of test subjects. In the end, the Doctor was brought down by the Vault Dweller and their allies in the Brotherhood of Steel. While raiding his lair in Vault 96, the Vault Dweller came across a handful of test subjects and freed them. One of these people was Cassie Holloway, who would go on to settle at Foundation after her liberation and would spend her time in the supply room. Holloway had been on her way to Appalachia to visit her uncle, the farmer Art Knapp, when she was kidnapped along with the rest of her caravan. In the aftermath of the Blackburn affair, the super mutants may have stopped attacking Foundation directly, but they didn't stop being a threat to other settler sites. In June 2104, the settlers of Foundation attempted to establish a new outpost. Kenneth Dean led Marilyn, Ruggie, Tom, and Samuel Hackerman to the nuclear bomb craters northeast of Foundation. While construction started well, the workers were running through their supplies far more quickly than they expected, and theft was suspected. Then came the sounds of heavy footfalls and growling outside their tents at night. At last came the revelation that they were dealing with another band of super mutants. Not long after this discovery, all 5 settlers lay dead in their partially built camp, having fallen in combat with the giant mutants. Later in 2104 came news from the White Spring Resort. Once abandoned by all but the robotic staff, the ancient hotel had new denizens, the Reborn Responders Organization. Headed by Rucker, the new responders hoped to follow in the footsteps of the original faction in helping to rebuild society and care for those in need. Along with this, they had access to a working vertibird and were making expeditions to the settlers' old stomping grounds, the Pit. Though the settlers were happy enough to leave their nightmares in the Steel City behind, they did send a representative to the White Spring to witness the events and bring back any available supplies. Okay, that covers the narrative, but there are a few settlers that didn't make it into the main story of the settlers, as their stories were unconnected to it, or because including them in the narrative would have been potentially distracting. First, we have the Sunnies. 3 robots, all named Sunny, that run the general store, armory, and kitchen in the Foundation marketplace. Each of them considers themselves to be the true Sunny and the others to be imposters. Next we have Kip. Kip is one of the 4 settlers who died at the observation camp. While all the corpses are unnamed, we know Kip's name thanks to Aubrey mentioning that he had the sound of Kip's head being caved in, ingrained in his memory. Third, we have Heather Ellis and her dog Chloe. Heather and Chloe came to Appalachia with the settlers, but ventured out to explore the region. They now dwell in Flatwoods, where Heather spends her time admiring the original responders. Fourth, before the bombs, Maggie Williams was a citizen of Monongah. The town was a coal mining community until Daniel Hornwright showed up, promising a risk-free life for miners and royalties for their coal for years to come. His auto miners subsequently exhausted their mines in short order, leaving the town destitute. When word came down that Hornwright was going to close the mine, many of the townspeople went inside to loot what equipment they could so that they could try to live off the sales of the pilfered goods. What they didn't know was that the mine was scheduled to be sealed. The charges detonated with many of the people of Monongah still inside, Maggie's father included. Upon meeting the Vault Dweller, she requests that they investigate the mine and discover the fate of her father. After blowing the mine open with a nuclear missile, the Vault Dweller discovered that Maggie's father had become the heart of a monstrous creature known as the Wendigo Colossus. Fifth, we have a settler that can only be met when working for the Raiders of the Crater in the Vault Raid, RobCo. RobCo was a problem for the settlers, stirring up antagonism between the people of Foundation for his own amusement. When they'd had enough of it, RobCo was banished from the settlement, but he didn't go far and ended up residing in the old boat shop on Spruce Knob Lake. Desperate to regain his place with the settlers, RobCo traded the raider Vlad information on Foundation in exchange for his cooperation in scuttling the raiders' Vault 79 heist attempt. Upon being caught, he can either be killed or exiled from Appalachia. Sixth, Frankie Beckett, the younger brother of Beckett, the companion for the Vault Dweller, came to Appalachia with his brother in 2103. While Beckett went off to become a Blood Eagle Raider, he left Frankie behind in Foundation to keep him safe. Frankie eventually became a Blood Eagle himself after his elder brother had already left the organization. Today, Frankie is either dead by his own brother's hand in the Watoga Underground or working as a trader. Seventh, we have Isla and her mother, a couple of the original settlers of Foundation. Neither can be found in the game, but we know that Isla is Frankie Beckett's girlfriend who is currently hiding from the Blood Eagles. 8th, Russell Dorsey wasn't the only settler to join the Brotherhood. Though Luis Ramirez and his parents came to Appalachia with the settlers, Luis joined up with the Brotherhood upon their arrival. 9th, we have Forager, a light companion of the Vault Dweller. Once an author, Forager is ready to kick back and enjoy retirement in the post-war. Upon successfully soliciting the Vault Dweller for a place to relax, the Vault Dweller receives plans for the Forager's favorite chair, and can build it back at their camp. Lastly, we have the Wanderer, another light companion of the Vault Dweller. This character can potentially be encountered in the wilderness of Appalachia and invited to spend time at the Vault Dweller's camp. Unfortunately, many hours of searching for this elusive individual proved fruitless for me, so I don't have anything to show you of her. With all the Settlers of Foundation covered, I have a few notes before closing things out. First, I try to keep the part of the video covering Appalachia and the pre-scorching years as short as possible, as I've covered it extensively in several other videos. If you're interested in what Appalachia was like between 2077 and 2096, I recommend you watch my videos covering the Mistresses of Mystery, the White Spring Enclave, the Appalachian Brotherhood of Steel, the Raiders of the Savage Divide, the Free States, and the Responders. If you're looking for something more concise than that 3.5 hours of detailed coverage, there's also my video loosely covering the full story in 10 minutes. I'll link all of these videos in the description. Second, I went through this content on 2 different characters, one in which I supported the Raiders getting into Vault 79, and one supporting the Settlers getting into Vault 79. I told this story with the most favorable outcomes from both playthroughs. This may not be exactly how you might experience the content, because there are many points at which the story can be altered by skill checks and choices. That said, regardless of these small changes, the broad strokes of the story are maintained. The only real choice comes with who you take to the vault. Third, in creating this video, I had to ask myself, what's up with Founders Hall? What was this place before the war? Well, I think I have an answer to that question. Though in-game Spruce Knob is close to a lake, Spruce Knob Lake, the real-world Spruce Knob is nowhere near a lake. I believe that the area that is now Founders Hall was built as a water pumping station to create Spruce Knob Lake. In pumping water up from deep beneath the mountain, pre-war state officials created a much more appetizing wilderness recreational area. The best support I have for this claim is the large pump within Founders Hall, and the fact that Spruce Knob Lake is fed from a creek running around Spruce Knob that is itself fed from an underground pipe that appears to come from the direction of Founders Hall. That said, this is speculation, so take it with a grain of salt. Alright, that should do it for part 1 of the story of the Settlers of Foundation. We'll be back for more when a significant amount of new information on the group has built up. Follow me on X for lore video announcements at Gaming with Maps. My Discord is open to the public, there's a link in the channel's banner. I stream every Friday evening on YouTube, come check it out if you're interested. If you appreciate what I do here and you want to support the channel financially, you can become a member on YouTube or a patron with Patreon. I want to thank my channel members and patrons, Mesothelioma, 76 of Texas, Dark Malcontent, Real76, Dr. Orion, Samsung Smart Fridge, Knight Spearhead, Ahotep, Prince Julius, and Chris G059 for their support. This has been the Irresolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.